Well, that was an amazing performance by Jamie Smith. Thank you all for sticking around and for joining us here at the hopeculture.us page for Hopelahoma. My name is Michael Carnuccio, and I'm honored to be joined tonight by Oklahoma's First Lady, Sarah Stitt. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here tonight.
Well, we're here and we're having a conversation about hope as part of the Hopelahoma effort, right? And there you have it on your shirt.
Yes.
It's a wonderful shirt. Folks can get that shirt for $10. All of the net proceeds go into the community. Our partner organization, Lynn Institute, Salt and Light Leadership Training, are contributing those resources into, let's see, a regional food bank, city center, urban bridge, Restore OKC, helping folks that right now could use some help because of the impact of coronavirus. So thank you so much for helping us with that and for wearing the shirt this evening.
Absolutely. So excited to do it. Any opportunity I can have to really raise a flag for hope and push hope through our community is wonderful. So we're so excited.
Well, let's talk about that because hope is such a big issue for you. In fact, it's become your platform, right? As First Lady. And so I'd love to know why. What is it about your story? Maybe take us back to your childhood and where this passion for hope comes from and this message for hope.
Well, I grew up right here in Oklahoma and in Tulsa, actually, downtown Tulsa. And just have spent my entire life here. As Kevin often reminds me, you've never lived anywhere else, and I haven't. I love Oklahoma. I love the people, and I'm just really committed to really spreading this message through our state because I think we need it. I grew up in Tulsa, and both of my parents actually met at a drug rehab. And so my dad was there, not necessarily for drugs, but had some hard times, and my mom had a really hard life and had some issues with drugs. And so they met there. And my dad actually managed the men's drug rehab for many years. So I grew up there. And my parents met there. And so at a very young age, I think I was exposed to a lot of people that didn't have hope. So people coming in, whether they were young or old, we had a lot of people that their families had been fed up with them, and they were, further along in their life, had lost their spouses, their children, their parent support, and they were hopeless. And my dad, I will tell you, my dad was the biggest purveyor of hope in my life because he always believed in someone. It didn't matter how hopeless their situation was or how the person really felt like there was no way out. My dad was their champion. And I have had so many people come up to me over the last few years that have told me stories about my dad that I didn't even know, that he would drive across state lines in the middle of the night to pick up a kid that was getting out of jail. And people many times said, your dad saved, my family member's life. And so I like to kind of rewind my hope back to my dad. He was such a good example because he truly loved people, and he was your biggest fan. And he was that for my mother. My mother struggled my whole childhood, never could really shake free her addiction issues. At the time, we just thought it was addiction, and it was kind of a different time era. You didn't really talk about mental illness or abuse. And as I got a little older, we began to realize there was some underlying issues to her addiction. It wasn't just addiction, as most addiction issues are. There's underlying abuse or mental health issues, and she really was the perfect storm for that. We found out a little bit later that she had been abused her whole childhood. Her earliest memories were some pretty severe abuse. And in that, it formed really just severe mental health issues. And so she really couldn't get the help she needed because it wasn't available. And my dad really spent his life just protecting her, trying to keep her safe. We did that as a family. But I will say my dad, he always believed that there was a chance and that God could help you get to the next step in your life, and he could bring you through whatever obstacle you were in. So my dad did a great job of just teaching us that. And, watching my mother and watching her struggle, I saw a life without hope. And I saw what that was like. And it was a death spiral, really, honestly. And so watching the two extremes in my life gave me a very unique perspective. But I really will say, I think at a very young age, I had a relationship with the Lord. And I think that if people ask me all the time, why is your story different than other people's in that situation? And I can just tell you, I have very early memories of being a very small child and talking to God. And deep down, I knew that God had a plan and a purpose for me. And that anything that I went through, whether it was good or bad, God would use later on in my life for his glory if I chose to really seek him and seek his will. And so I think that kind of inherent, very, very deeply planted hope that my dad, I really think my dad didn't do it intentionally. I just watched him walk that out. And he always believed in someone and always believed that you should get another chance. And it gave me that hope and that relationship with the Lord. And so even when times were dark, and I remember times as, a child and a teenager feeling very alone and wondering if I would ever get out of this kind of trap that I felt that I was in. But I knew just deep down that God had a plan and a purpose for me, and I had to just seek him above my current situation. And I had to look past my current situation. I think we do that as humans. Our current situations become so overwhelming. They drown us, and we can't look to the next day or the next minute or the next hour. And that's where you find individuals that are hopeless when they can't even plan a day ahead, because there's no thought process for that. It's survival mode. And a lot of us that grew up in situations with struggling parents or struggling siblings, we inherently have that kind of survival mode. And you have to combat that with hope, because hope is really your weapon against that. It is a weapon against being drowned and depressed and not being able to go on. Hope is the weapon that we use for that. And the Bible is so clear that we need hope. And I believe that God has a plan and a purpose for every single person on this planet.
Amen.
And his plans are to prosper them, to give them a hope and a future. And so we, though, have to do our part. So sometimes I think people think God's up there with a fairy wand, just picking and choosing who he wants to bless, but that's not true. And I could have easily gone the other way. I had friends in similar situations that didn't survive, that, their lives were taken or took their own lives because they got sucked into kind of that death trap, and they didn't take the hands and the things that were offered to them that were hope. You have to do your part. But I think especially right now, this is really poignant as all of us are kind of in our houses and in our kind of on top of each other. And I think we're all kind of ruminating and thinking about different things. And this is where we can use our sphere of influence and like this, just, over the internet, and spread hope that there is going to be a brighter day. We are going to get through this current situation, just like we have gotten through other situations in Oklahoma.
You mentioned a couple things there that I think are so key. First, the phrase used, the purveyor of hope, right? And talking about your father. And so I think for everyone right now listening, they can, or watching this, they can think about who's that been in their life. And maybe the challenge, are they serving in that capacity for someone else as well? Right. So I want to ask you about that question, because you mentioned kind of hopelessness and the way things are right now. So we have a lot of families, a lot of mothers and fathers that are at home. Their kids have questions, and there's some scary times or some scary conversations that maybe they feel a little hopeless. What advice would you have for them? What are you telling your children right now?
Well, Kevin does a really good job with our kids. I think when you come from a situation where it's kind of a battleground, when you grow up in that, you don't always instinctively choose hope. And I have to train myself. I am constantly, reminding myself, okay, this is the path of hope. This is not. And Kevin, though, he inherently was born with hope. He always thinks the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, and that, tomorrow's going to be a better day than today. And so he does a really good job of our kids whenever we're in either a crisis situation or difficult circumstances. He always points us to the Bible, and he always tells our kids, the Bible says to give thanks in all circumstances. It doesn't say to give thanks when you have enough food on your table, or the sun's out, or you're going to school every day, or people aren't sick. the Bible says to give thanks in all circumstances. And it also says that God will work together for good for those who serve him. And so we really teach that to our kids. However, there has to be balance. So you have to allow
Yeah.
your family members to say, well, I still feel this way, or I'm still nervous and worried about that. And I have 6 kids, so I have the whole spectrum of, people that walk in these different things. And I have a couple of kids that really do get fearful in times like this. And I have to allow them that comfortable opportunity to be able to say, hey, I know what you tell me, but this is still very scary for me. And I tell my children that are like that, as a little girl, I didn't sleep very much at night. I was
Wow.
very anxious as a child. And I learned something when I was about probably 9 or 10. And I would go to sleep saying, I trust you, Lord. I trust you, Lord. And so I do that now. I do that in any situation. A lot of times I tell Kevin, I don't want to talk about negative things before I go to bed because I can't, it affects my sleep. But what I do is I spin it and I say, I trust you, Lord. And so I tell my children that are anxious, because many times at night when we're alone in the dark and we're kind of in our own head is when those things can become overwhelming. And even for children. And I tell them, you bring your prayers before the Lord and you talk about them. And then you say, God, I trust you in this situation. And the more you say that, it doesn't mean that immediately you're great, but you begin to believe that. And so we've been just really trying to give our kids balance and letting them see, hey, let's look at the positive. We're getting to play games together. We're getting to do this. But they know there's people out there that are very scared and very suffering and are suffering and having a hard time. And we also know there's people out there that are struggling to be able to feed their families. And they may not have a place to live in for very much longer. So we're trying to keep it in perspective. But again, the way we really like to talk to our children is to make sure there's an open space that they can really express their fears or their thoughts. However, you can go too far with that. And so you have to have balance. So we try to just bring balance, but it's different every day and with every situation too.
So you mentioned the foundation of faith that's been important in your life and that you're trying to instill in your children as well. And you've mentioned that even in a time like this, right, the importance of not only having hope, but finding hope. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a large movement in this in Oklahoma City, but across this whole entire state, of believers being bold in their witness and knowing that this is they're made for a time such as this and to engage. And so what are you telling to fellow believers, or what are you telling to others about how they can get involved right now, how they can lift others up, and how they can bring hope to the community?
Well, I agree with you that the church was created for times of need. And I think often we turn those reins over to others. And I think we are going to see a rising up of the church and believers in wanting to serve their communities in all sorts of capacities. I've heard story after story of people delivering meals to those that can't get out, of people trying to help with childcare and delivering food and offering places to stay. So I think this is where the church is. We are equipped for this. We have the roadmap. We have God's word. He gives us the tools for this. We need to use it for his glory and to instill hope in others, because the fear of the unknown is overwhelming. And you can watch someone that it normally operates in a very, just contemplative, normal way. But something like this, where we don't know the effect of this, we don't know where it's at, we don't know how sick it's going to make you, can take away your normal mode of operation, and fear and panic set in. And then it is just a very dark place for a lot of people. And that passes on to our children, our neighbors, our parents, our family members. And so we need to do a good job as the church. We know that, yes, terrible things are happening, but it's going to be okay. And we need to spread hope, and we need to serve. And we need to not be selfish. We obviously need to be smart. I think people have come up with some great ways to help others and to defer to others. And so, it's not just, I'm laughing about this hoarding toilet paper thing because I have been, as I mentioned earlier, moving my parents, and I thought,
Yeah.
oh, we need toilet paper. There was no toilet paper anywhere.
Wow.
But it's this kind of mentality of hoarding, but we need to defer to others because
Mm.
we need to trust that we're going to be provided for, and we need to make sure that we are not just toilet paper, but in anything, and think of ways that we can serve others and help others who maybe are feeling that hopelessness or that panic or that fear, help them feel more secure.
Yeah, if you're making that trip to the pharmacy or the supermarket,
Right.
is the elderly couple across the street or down
Right.
the corner, you ask them to find out if they need anything. For example,
Mhm.
one thing folks can do to help, an easy step is right now at hopelahoma.com, they can get the shirt you're wearing.
Yes.
And they can make sure that all the net proceeds of that, by getting that shirt, will go into the community and help make sure there's meals, medical assistance, everything needed for those that are most impacted by the coronavirus. You mentioned service, and I want to ask you about service. Here, you become First Lady of Oklahoma, and you have an opportunity at that platform to take on any issue you would like, and get involved in any way. And hope and the science of hope is where you've put your focus. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe a little bit about why and what your vision is for the state through that effort?
Yes. Well, early on the campaign trail, people began to say, well, what's your platform going to be? What are you going to talk about? And I really wanted to talk about, for one, mental illness, because I grew up in a home. Both my parents had actually pretty severe mental illness, and I wanted to raise kind of awareness about that it's okay to talk about,
Mhm.
because what we often do with hidden things and hidden really diseases is we those people are really sequestered in their own lives. It's like a prison, and it's without hope. And so as I began to talk about that and tell my story, a good friend of mine that knows me well, she said, you have to read this book. And I said, okay. And of course, it's the middle of the campaign trail. Like, I'm, gone from 6 a.m. till midnight every night. But she gives me this book. She says, you have to read this book. So I read this book, and it's very impactful for me. However, I was caught up in the excitement of everything.
Sure.
But after Kevin won and things settled down, I took out that book, and it's called Hope Rising. And it's by Casey Gwynn and Dr. Chan Hellman, who's right here in Oklahoma.
Yep.
And it's a story. It really takes it breaks down hope, that hope isn't necessarily just a feeling, like this inherent feeling that some people are blessed with and some people aren't. It's a science. And if we can take our children and our young people that are growing up in broken homes like I did, that maybe struggled with hope and struggled with survival, and we can teach them, and it's really neat because it talks about relationships, and we can teach them how to have hope, it will literally change the trajectory of our state. And as I read that, that really resounded with me because I couldn't really put my finger on what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I had all my life verses, and a lot of them centered around hope. But as I read that, it really resounded with me, and I began to talk to others, and that message was really falling on fertile ground. And I think our state is in a very ripe place right now. We need hope. And aside from the coronavirus, even before, we are ready for change. We are tired of being the last in education and all of these different social issues, and in prison and all of these things. And so we are ripe for hope, but we have to teach people how to do it. And as believers, inherently, we know that hope is centered on the cross. But this book did such a great job of breaking it down into digestible steps that we can walk out in our community around us. So as I read that and I began to talk to others, the excitement grew. And we have partnered with many agencies in government and many nonprofits to really spread this message. And I think as we come out of this corona crisis that we're in, that the whole country's in, this is really it's going to get traction, and our state is going to have a direction and a roadmap for hope. And I think it's going to change future generations of our state.
So what would you say your, I don't know, charge for Oklahoma or your call on your fellow Oklahomans would be in light of this, for your idea about changing that trajectory, about the science of hope, but but leaning in and being the salt and light for their fellow Oklahomans. What would you say to them today?
I would say we need to take every day as a new opportunity. And I wake up every morning and I say, God, use me today. Help me to live in today for your glory and to serve others. And so that's what I think we can do. We can look at our situation, whether it's in our tiny little apartment complex with our tons of children, and we can look at the children around us and use our opportunities to purvey hope and bring hope. Or if it's serving the elderly that can't get out and taking things. And I saw someone told me a story the other day that they walked through a neighborhood and they were knocking on people's doors, but they were just talking to them through the door. And they're saying, how can I pray for you? Is there something that I can do for you? And it was a neighborhood with a lot of elderly. Just that human contact, knowing that someone was out there and someone cared, was a huge lifter of their spirits. And so I think we need to approach in this time where we can easily get drowned in our current situation and feel very depressed and dark. We can choose to be a spreader of hope, and we can choose to make small choices that are impactful for other people's lives. We can choose to have relationships. We can choose to say kind things and do kind things. And it's very small. And this book is amazing because it breaks it down in a way. It's not some far out there, science that the common man can't do. This is simple actions that we can teach each other and ourselves that will make a difference in our state and the lives of the people around us.
Dr. Chan Hellman there at OU, there in Norman, he does fantastic work, an incredible speaker on the science of hope as well. I know we're coming to the end of our conversation tonight as you have a family there waiting for you and some homeschooling tomorrow, just like my wife and I do here. Yes. Very grateful for your time in this conversation. One last question that I have for you is, I heard someone say one time that Jesus loves you even on your worst day, and no matter how bad things can get. And you talked about your foundation of faith and what's important. And so maybe along those lines here, as we look for the tomorrow and the next day, you mentioned a couple of life verses you have or anything else. Do you have one you'd like to share with anyone, or just a piece of advice for tomorrow, that one day at a time opportunity?
You know what I'm going to share, and it's a text that a friend sent me yesterday. And as you're talking, it was just kind of resounding with me. She sent me this, and I know her very well, and I know she's had some very hard times in her life. And she sent it as an encouragement just to let me know that, hey, I'm thinking about you and I'm praying for you. And she said one time when one of her children was really, really struggling and really sick, and she said, I was talking to a friend, and I'm going to read it. And I said to my friend, everybody always tells me God doesn't give us more than we can handle, but I think I've reached my limit, she said to her friend. And she said, my friend stopped me and she looked shocked. And she said, God does give us more than we can handle. He just doesn't give us more than he can handle. And God has used that statement. She sent that to me and she said, God has used that statement in my life when I was going through the deepest, darkest times. And so I think that's what perspective is what we need as Oklahomans. And as we're all shut in our homes, in our own little spaces, it's hard to keep perspective that the world is going on. But we need to realize God is in control of everything that's happening. And we need to do our best in our situation to keep our sphere of influence and our head up and keep doing what's right and keep trusting the Lord and keep spreading hope. And that will make a difference in our community. And we need to remember that this is all more than we can handle. Every day I wake up and I go, could this be a bad dream? But it's not more than he can handle. And as we begin to spread that message of love and hope, I think people will begin to reach out and reach their hands out for that help. So thank you to all of Oklahomans that are already doing that. And it's times like these that really bring people together and people become creative and innovative and loving and reconnect in their communities. So there are positives to things like this.
Well, thank you for your time. I know, I believe tomorrow night you'll be in Tulsa with Transformation Church, a pretty big event there as well.
Yes, we decided to put together a just prayer service and worship service to just bring people hope and peace, because we do recognize, I mean, I talk to people every day that are struggling with just the fear and the panic. So we thought it'd be great to bring pastors from all over the state, and Transformation Church volunteered to host it. And so we're going to have pastors dialing in from their different churches to just
Wow.
say specific prayers and just little words of wisdom and hope and peace. And I'm really excited about it because it's a chance for Oklahomans to tune in for that 60 minutes. I think it's channel 9 and channel 6.
Yes.
Channel 9 Oklahoma City, channel 6 in Tulsa, and then Transformation Church website will be live streaming it. So it starts at 6:30 tomorrow night. So we would love everyone to tune in and help spread the message.
So 6:30 to 7:30 tomorrow night. That's Thursday evening with Channel 9 or 6 or Transformation Church. And then at 7:30 back at Oklahoma, Jacob Weaver will be performing and as the worship leader with Skyline, incredible musician. You're going to really enjoy the singer-songwriter Jacob Weaver. And all this again, you can go to hopeoklahoma.com and get the shirt that First Lady Stitt is wearing. And you can help support the community with all the net proceeds there going back to the community. Thank you so much for your time this evening, taking some time for your family, and thank you for your leadership for the state and making hope your platform and your message.
Well, thank you guys for everything you're doing to spread this message of hope. And I know it's making an impact in a lot of people's lives. So thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. Good evening.